I know this because for the majority of my life, I assumed that when I turned on the tap anywhere in the United States that I was going to get clean, healthy, safe drinking water. But what I got was clear water when I moved to Wilmington. I couldn't see the toxins. I couldn't see the contaminants. Couldn't see them, couldn't taste them, couldn't smell them, but they were there.
Right. Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast, where we bring you interviews with industry leaders, climate champions, sustainability practitioners, EHS and hazmat professionals making an impact in their businesses today. Each leader solving complex challenges and delivering solutions within their areas of expertise. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and thanks for joining us today. Before we jump in, make sure to follow us on your devices and visit my website at www.seankgrady.com and sign up for our newsletter and email announcements. Now let's get started. Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is Emily Donovan. Emily she's got the record. I think she's a 3-time returning guest on the show. So we're super excited to have Emily back on the show. And she can catch us up on what's going on with Clean Cape Fear and all the great work that she's been doing to help her local community there in North Carolina. And so, Emily, welcome back to the show. And if for the listeners who haven't really caught up on any of the previous episodes that we've talked about, share a little bit about what you guys are doing at Clean Cape Fear and kind of your mission in life there with that organization.
Yeah, so Clean Cape Fear, we're a grassroots community group. We actually just had our 8th anniversary. Never thought we would, when we started this, that we would be at it still today. But we did know this was a hard fight. So we formed after learning that DuPont, now called Chemours, had dumped extreme levels of PFAS, including Gen X, into our water supply, which ended up in our tap water. And so, these last 8 years, our whole focus has been holding our elected leaders accountable, stopping PFAS exposures, making sure that the polluter pays and not the communities that were impacted, and then making sure that we understand the health risks. And so that's kind of been the sole focus of our journey these last 8 years. It's been a bit of a wild ride.
Well, I know. And we connected several years ago, and it was interesting because it was a time when the Dark Waters movie was coming out. And I think I just had Robert Ballot on the show. And shortly thereafter, we connected and we talked about some of the good work that you've done and supported Robert and Mark Ruffalo and some of the work that they're doing to promote, these rules that were implemented by the EPA, just last year. And which was seemed to be like a monumental achievement for all of the hard work that Robert and his team and other attorneys have done and plaintiffs over the years who've been suing, DuPont, Chemours, other companies like them who have been responsible for disposing of PFAS in either watersheds or landfills or wherever, and it's had a big impact on local communities. And so we connected, and I thought that was a great way to kind of, give a different perspective for our listeners of individuals who really have a stake in the game of this exposure that people are having, because I think a lot of people don't really have a real serious connection to, massive or large amounts or acute, amounts of PFAS exposure. It's more of a chronic or just they don't know that they're even exposed. But you guys have real exposure issues, and I thought it was a great, way to shed a light on that aspect of what communities are dealing with that are similar to maybe if you've watched the Dark Waters movie, what they face. So thanks for coming on the show to talk about what you're doing with Clean Cape Fear, because it's so important, and my heart goes out for you guys and everything you're doing. So let's roll this up a little bit. Here we are, June 2025. We just, had the new rules that were passed by the EPA and the Biden administration last year, and now just this past month, on the 14th of May. The EPA has come out and they are pulling back 4 of the 6 compounds that they regulated through the Safe Drinking Water Act and they were all, I think, mostly the short chain PFAS, not the long chain ones, the PFOs and the PFOS. So how, I mean, what are you guys thinking and what's happening on your front?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that are important for listeners to remember. It's that these were finalized maximum contaminant drinking water levels, and so because they're finalized, the Safe Drinking Water Act has an anti-backslide provision within it, and so we think that what the EPA is currently doing right now looks like a rollback, and that would be illegal. So I think that's the first thing that we need to consider. The second thing that we need to consider is that the what the EPA is doing with there were 6 PFAS, like you said, that were approved last year for drinking water standards. They're delaying the implementation timeline for 2 of them. That's PFOS and PFOA. Those are both no longer in commercial use. And then they're taking the ones that are in commercial use and they're saying that they want to rescind and reevaluate them. This is going to put a tremendous burden back on communities where it does not belong. Communities need to have a level of certainty with regulations to say, here's what the expectation is. These are the drinking water levels. And as you decide if you have a problem in your area and you need to upgrade your treatment process, you can have a clear timeline and a clear understanding of what you need to treat towards. By removing these 4 PFAS, there's creating a cloud of uncertainty and chaos. And that, again, that burden now falls back onto communities like mine, because 8 years ago, when we learned we had Gen X in our tap water, we kept hearing over and over again that the water met or exceeded all state and federal guidelines. That's because there weren't any. That
Right.
wasn't saying
Right.
much of anything.
Right.
And what the EPA is doing right now, this new administration is now it feels like they're rolling back finalized and already set into law drinking water standards for compounds that some of them are still in commercial use. These are the compounds that we may start seeing showing up more prevalent, more frequently in drinking water. So I think they estimate that it's showing up in about 10% of public water supplies within the United States right now. There's a real concern that that's just going to continue to grow because these are the PFAS that are being used regularly now.
Right. Right.
So, I think that's one thing for listeners to remember. Another thing for listeners to remember is that this absolutely is your problem, even if your tap water is not contaminated, because 96% of Americans have detectable levels of PFAS in their blood. How did it get there? What we're clearly being exposed, and we have to know that blood exposure is not the only benchmark for PFAS exposures. These newer chain PFAS like Gen X and the ones that the EPA is creating uncertainty around, these pass through the body quicker. So they may not accumulate in the blood, but that doesn't mean that when you're being exposed to them, that you're not having some sort of impact. We liken it, a lot of researchers and scientists use the analogy of chronic alcohol consumption. Having a glass of wine here and there or beer every now and then, not a problem. If you do it every day for years and years and years,
It catches up to you.
it absolutely, the body will show signs of toxicity. That's reasonable to assume that the same thing would be occurring with PFAS. We're not consenting to this. That's the one thing I think listeners also need to recognize is you can choose to eliminate alcohol from your diet. You can choose to eliminate anything from your diet, but you can't choose to eliminate your exposures to PFAS when they go unregulated, when they're allowed to hide in our tap water, hide in our food supply, hide in our air, hide in our waterways.
Great points. And it is interesting when you think about it. This kind of rollback almost is going to be reigniting so many new lawsuits in my mind against the polluters of these chemicals to go through a whole nother like cycle of dark water scenarios of epidemiology studies, testing human exposure. Is it really going to be is it really causing cancer for all these compounds that just got repealed And I just see like this is going to be just a similar cycle again for these chemicals, because they're taking them off the list. And they've already done the work to demonstrate that they have the toxicity and the cancer causing concerns, and now we're just going back and reassessing it again. What was the wrong with the assessment the first time, I guess, would be a question I would have.
Well, and I think that's a really nuanced and detailed question that our community, our community is not in a position, we're not technical experts at that level. You'd want to ask a trained professional to find out, why is the chemical industry relitigating what appeared to be settled science? That is definitely a question that we should be asking back to the chemical industry, to the current EPA administration. What are they doing? Why are they doing it? From a contaminated community perspective, here's what's important to remember for the average American. That's what I am, is, here's something that what we do know, it's harmful for the ones that we've studied. For the ones that lack the level of study that PFOA and PFOS have, why, let's use precautionary principles. This should not be in our tap water, period. If we're following the Clean Water Act, the Clean Water Act is very clear that these chemicals are not supposed to be released or discharged unless there's been approval in the permitting process. And the one thing that we found in North Carolina is that DuPont did not disclose. They didn't disclose this chemistry. It was grandfathered in. They hid it from the government. They hid it from regulators. 3M, DuPont both did it. I mean, that is settled. They knew the toxicity when they were making it. They knew they were releasing it. That is very settled. This newer replacement chemistry, they're trying to do the same thing. They're trying to say that this is safe, but where's the body of evidence? Where is the body of evidence that 100% confirms that this is safe? That doesn't exist, I think. But, before we try to explain why do we have to rehash the finalized drinking water standards, I think it is incredibly important for listeners to fully understand this is law. These six PFAS are current law right now. So while the chemical industry is challenging the current law, and the EPA issued a press release, that's all this was a press release saying, here's our plan. Our plan is to no longer defend the drinking water standards. Our plan is to delay 2 of them and review 4 of them. That while they delay and while they review, it's my understanding these are still the federal drinking water standards. Again, not a regulator, not a water utility expert. So I would fact check that.
Or an attorney.
None of
right?
that.
Yeah.
Just an overexposed contaminated community member who did not consent to being poisoned through tap water with PFAS. That is very concerned that our community had, excess levels of PFAS, not only in our blood, but in our tap water. We're seeing it in our waterways. It's showing up in our sea foam along our beautiful beaches that bring in, $1 billion annually in tourism economy. Fish that's contaminated to the point that it's advised to eat it maybe once a year. This is a toxin that we really need to remember rises above all the rest. The NRDC made a really good, their science advisor made a really good point that just said, of all the toxins, why is PFAS the one that gets so much attention? And it's because it does rise above the rest for its persistence, for the fact that it stays in the environment, doesn't naturally degrade. There is no proven safe disposal method at this time. The fact that every time scientists study, they find some organ system that is impacted. And again, I think what the chemical industry is trying to do is they're trying to say, keep drinking this until science proves that it's unhealthy at this level. That burden should not be in our body. That we are not the guinea pigs.
Yeah. No, yeah. Well, I do think in the past few years, there has been some pretty good advancements on treatment of PFAS in water in certain applications. you're still going to have a residual of PFAS at some level for disposal. But there are some new promising technologies, I think, that's pretty good out there. So there are some good things, I think, on the forefront to help address the treatment side of this, which I think is good. I think the biggest thing I'm kind of without, I mean, guess reading between the lines here with EPA is they're really concerned about the cost impact to municipalities for complying with this rule. And basically, I don't think the EPA or these municipalities have put together enough funding to adequately support these utilities with the type of treatment systems that are needed to meet the level. And now they're like, wow, we need to probably rethink this because it's billions and billions of dollars and we didn't account for that much. I mean, that's kind of what I'm sensing, but maybe I'm wrong. But what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Congress, through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, gave money. I think it was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that
Mhm.
actually earmarked funding specifically for this. Because I think what utilities don't like is unfunded mandates.
Sure.
Is
Yeah.
don't make us treat for something and then not provide us with resources. And for low income communities and disadvantaged communities of all types, that is a huge concern and 100% something we should be addressing. And I think that's exactly what the Biden administration was doing, is they were saying, hey, we know that we want our administration to issue first ever federal PFAS drinking water standards. And we know that this cannot be unfunded. We know that there needs to be money and assistance provided. I think that's why PFOA and PFOS were designated as hazardous substances, to make sure that there was a legal pathway to be able to get cleanup costs. We're in litigation right now. This is now 6 years running that our utilities locally have been shouldering the burden of the cleanup. We've made the upgrades in the majority of our communities. There's still, unfortunately, one county, Brunswick County, that still has not been able to upgrade their treatment process through a series of construction delays. These have been massive investments. We have seen our water rates go up. We are frustrated that the water rates are rising. We also know that it's not our fault. We didn't cause this, that it is
Right.
the polluter that should be paying. And so I think there needs to be a clearer, faster mechanism to ensure that the polluter pays for the cleanup. There's massive litigation that happened, huge litigation between 3M and the multi-district litigation that happened with AFFF. I think Rob Alott was also leading that case. That money is supposed to be assisting water utilities to be able to do cleanup. Chemours and DuPont also did a massive settlement. So the money is available. And I think what we also need to step back and consider is, what are we trying to tell the average American? You need to drink these chemicals that have been linked to certain cancers and serious illnesses and diseases, while we know that cancer is on the rise in an unnatural way in the United
Mhm.
States. So you need to bear the burden, can take the risk, and either drink unhealthy water, or let's all work together, shoulder the burden, and improve our public drinking water. So there's a couple of things we have to consider. And I will say that what baffles me more than anything, that I think listeners really should understand, is when groups like mine, we go to DC and we advocate for these drinking water standards, because we don't want PFAS in our tap water. We don't
No.
want any other community to wake up and have their utilities tell them that the water meets or exceeds all state and federal guidelines, because there aren't any. And that's why there's PFAS in our tap water and the utility wasn't doing anything about it. The thing that I think is important to know is, we didn't see utilities with us fighting to get these drinking water standards. Why are they fighting against us on these drinking water standards? They're in the public health business.
They
Well,
should be. Yeah, they should be right there saying, "Hey, why are you yeah, because it seems like there's even though they're not the generator of these chemicals, they are a distributor of the chemicals in a way, right? I mean, because they're processing them through their system.
they're
And
making a product, and
yeah,
that product, there is a trust, there's a public trust that is included in the product. It's that when you turn on your tap water, you're hoping that it doesn't give you cancer, or you're hoping that it's not polluting your body. There is a trust that's happening between you and if you're on public water and your public water provider, that you're getting what you need. And I know this because for the majority of my life, I assumed that when I turned on the tap anywhere in the United States, that I was going to get clean, healthy, safe drinking water. But what I got was clear water when I moved to Wilmington. I couldn't see the toxins. I
Contaminants.
couldn't see the
Or
contaminants.
taste them.
Couldn't
Yeah.
see them, couldn't taste them, couldn't smell them, but they were there.
Right. Well, that's an interesting perspective that a lot of people aren't really thinking through. Hello, ET Nation. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy the interviews we bring you, please consider supporting the program by visiting my website at seankgrady.com and buy me a cup of coffee. Proceeds will go towards helping me continue producing timely content and offsetting production costs. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize a few of our sponsors of the show who have been amazing partners and who are ET Nation legends. If you're looking for a driller and an environmental contracting firm to help you delineate the extent of contamination at your site, then look no further than Cascade Environmental. Cascade has over 37 offices across the country and offers a huge range of environmental and geotechnical drilling, site characterization, and remediation services. With their huge fleet of equipment and nationwide coverage, Cascade is a great choice to support your environmental and infrastructure needs. To learn more about their company, visit their website at cascade-env.com. That's cascade-env.com. I'd also like to give a shout out to Enthalpy Analytical. If you're looking for a single source for all your laboratory testing services, then give Enthalpy Analytical a call. With their network of accredited laboratories, experienced project managers, chemists, and industry professionals, they have everything you need to support your next project. They can analyze anything from drinking water, groundwater, soil, sediment, sludge, air, and much more. To learn more about Enthalpy Analytical, visit their website at enthalpy.com. That's enthalpy.com. Finally, I'd like to recognize Zappa Stewart, the leading provider of superabsorbent polymer technology for the power, dredging, oil and gas, and remediation sectors for over 20 years. When a reliable, fast, and cost-effective liquid waste solidification solution is needed, customers count on Zappa Stewart's brand of SAPs and technical expertise. When liquid waste needs to be out of sight and out of mind, give Zappa Stewart a call. To learn more about Zappa Stewart, go to my website at seankgrady.com. That's seankgrady.com. Now, let's dive back into this interview. I mean, yeah, it is interesting that the public utilities aren't, shouldering, the burden with you side by side to go and advocate for these changes, because they are, they're delivering the actual and contaminated water, and they haven't been able to process it. And I think their fear more than likely is probably that, oh my gosh, how do we, treat all this, and what's the cost to us, and how do we pay for that? Is it going to have to be taxpayers or ratepayers to support us, or, it's a mess because there's not a clear way of getting this resolved I think in an effective way that is addressing the issue. And looking at the EPA statements, they clearly say, hey, we really want to help our communities with these PFAS outreach type programs and things like that. But my thought is like, okay, well, how about having a more robust, financial mechanism to help these utilities actually address the PFAS treatment process? I mean, the sampling process seems to be to confirm they have it seems to be a little archaic in the way they're doing it, and the time between sampling events is stretched out a little bit. The UCMR type rule of sampling, for impacts of drinking water, public utilities. I mean, it's not like it's very, very prescriptive. I mean, it's prescriptive enough that you have to go out and sample like once every 6 months or something, but you can pick when you want to do it. It's not like, a required time. So I'm a little interested to continue looking at this in a little more objective way, so people can kind of really see the full impact. And then that's why I'm glad I brought you on, because you're helping us figure this out, Emily.
Yeah, just the accidental advocate, because this isn't something that I woke up one day or went to school for or was trained for and said, I'm going to learn about tap water. This was born out of necessity. It was
Yeah.
born out of crisis. But I think it's important that the communities all across the country recognize that we have a tap water crisis. I mean, we really do. If we look at how tap water is regulated, this was one thing that was probably the most shocking thing for me to learn, is that, when the Safe Drinking Water Act was put in place, it was actually working pretty well. And new contaminants, the EPA was pumping out new contaminants, new contaminants, new contaminants. And then the water utility industry said, whoa, we can't keep up. We don't want this unfunded mandate. And instead of passing a law to make sure that these were funded mandates, they worked through Congress to amend the Safe Drinking Water Act to make it harder for the EPA to issue drinking water standards. What a backwards approach. What a bury your head in the sand approach. We are dealing with 21st century chemistry, and it is getting released and it is getting pumped into our environment. And in my county, our drinking water facility had not been updated in 40, almost 50, 40
Wow.
years.
Yeah.
50.
Right.
So the amount of PFAS that shows up in the source water is
Mhm.
just passing right through to the tap water, because there's no filtration for that.
Mm.
So we're dealing with a lot of aging infrastructure that is not keeping up with the level of chemistry that is getting allowed to be used and misused, and companies that irresponsibly release the toxicants. So we have a big issue here, and I think utilities are on the wrong side of the fight. I understand their desire to make sure that they provide for their community, and we don't push people into more poverty or make drinking water inaccessible to poor and low income families and disadvantaged families. There has to be a better way than show up every day. Instead of fighting for the drinking water standards, you fight for the funding for the drinking water standards. And I'm just not seeing that, nor has that been happening historically. Instead, we tend to see the utilities side with the chemical industry, lock and step almost all the time.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting, and it is disheartening, and I'm assuming that there are a lot of groups probably suing the EPA right now for this action, or this call for repealing of the four chemicals. What have you heard on that front across the industry, or across the I guess the groups that you're involved with?
I work with our allies are the environmental community, because we have shared interests. Obviously, Clean Cape Fear and other contaminated community groups, we don't want these exposures. So one of our big pillar is stop the exposure. The environmental community says the best way, the cheapest way, the most affordable way to stop the exposure is to make sure they don't enter the environment to begin with. They don't enter the waterway. And so we tend to align ourselves in that approach. So what is industry saying? I mean, you'll have to have industry on to find out what industry has
Well,
to say.
right, yeah, for sure, and we may we may just have those guys on just to kind of get their take on this. Some of the things I've heard though is that um, industry doesn't like the fact that the classification of a hazardous constituent was dropped into CERCLA, because of the joint several liability clauses in CERCLA. I mean, anybody can get pulled in who even just had, basically no real reason to have impact on it. And I think the biggest group of people who are I guess most concerned about it are maybe the solid waste companies, or the municipality utilities like that, who are processing waste from the generators that come to them. They're really aggregators in the whole grand scheme of things. They're not really the generator, but now all of a sudden, because they have a business that is processing water or waste that comes to them, now they are responsible for all the PFAS impacts. I get their challenge. I mean, I understand it. And they're like, it would be better if it was in RECRA. in the Conservation Recovery Act. If it was there, then, it's more focused on the generator, and that would make a more sense that some of the arguments I'm hearing from industry, leaders in the environmental industry right now. And I kind of think, well, okay, I can kind of side along with that thought process, because I've been a part of Superfund projects before, and you don't want to get one of those 106 letters that say, hey, come join the party, we want you to start paying for a cleanup, when you really didn't have much to do with it. And then that just cascades a whole bunch of enforcement actions and attorneys and things like that. And I kind of see that point, but we got to have some way to make this effective for the people who are exposed, and people who are in the midst of processing these types of chemicals, who really didn't have responsibility for generating them or sending them their way. So
yeah,
it's complicated.
We absolutely advocated to make PFAS hazardous under RCRA. We felt that was the best, strongest path. So we agree there. So you'll have to ask the EPA why the EPA didn't do that, because boy, did we hound them to do it. I don't think we're going to see this EPA ever do that. I mean, this EPA has already installed, this current administration has already installed 2 chemical industry executives into the chemical safety and new chemical areas. These were the same people that they had previously under the first Trump administration. We're seeing a delay in PFOA and PFOS in drinking water, and a review of the other 4, creating uncertainty. So we're just not seeing a lot out of this current EPA that shows us that they are treating contaminated communities as important as the chemical industry when it comes to having stake ownership, and how the EPA is run right now. Another thing that I will, getting back to your comment of, it's very important, on the ground community does not necessarily understand that their utility can have 2 different functions. That one function is they've got the drinking water plant, the drinking water facility, and that the other part of the municipality has a waste treatment system. And so I will say that for the waste treatment system, there are systems in play. There are programs in place. There are pre-treatment programs that empower the waste treatment facility to recover costs of cleanup, so that it doesn't fall on them. But what we're not seeing is those municipalities or those interest groups say, beef up our funding, make the standards very clear to understand. They're basically saying, give me a permit shield. And that's inappropriate. And I don't think that's the right approach. Again, they're on the wrong side of this topic. Wilmington sits downstream of the Cape Fear River, which is the largest river system in North Carolina. It provides 1.5 million residents with drinking water. And so as the last stop before this highly polluted river, an industrialized river, reaches the ocean, there's a lot of different municipalities that have been sued for their inability to handle their pretreatment programs. I mean, the laws are already there. The laws already provide for a mechanism for them to control the releases of PFAS from these waste facilities. Yes, they're processing it and they're receiving it. But again, that is their job. Their job is to receive the waste, and their job is to treat the waste that they receive appropriately, and make sure that they don't release it into bodies of water that are then also used for drinking water down the river.
I'm in the middle of a pre-treatment process program right now for a municipality and a client that's, wanting to discharge. And, there's multiple players in that whole scenario too. So you've got state agencies, right, that issue the NPDES permits to these municipalities. So they have to be on board with what the agency is going to allow them to discharge to a receiving body of water. And depending on those states that how aggressive they are with, PFAS and things like that, we are starting to see that some states are adding it as a discharge limit, in their discharge limit. So that's good. But once those permits are, established for those, discharging PTOWs, whatever publicly owned treatment works, then they have the obligation to create the pretreatment discharge programs with the local industry that discharges to that facility. And now you bring in the city ordinances, and you have municipalities at that level that also need to work in hand with those. It's there's a lot of layers in this that you have to establish those limits, and you got to get those people on board to agree to those ordinance limits, because now you've got discharge limits, and also they're not going to let you just make any level, because the state agency is also going to oversee what this pretreatment programs are like as well. I mean, it can be very complicated, and I think right now a lot of the states are just not in a position, or they don't want to take a real hard stance on what the limits are right now with some of this PFAS stuff, because it's up in the air. And it's putting everybody in flux. I mean, we as consultants, me as a consultant, we're all like, well, what's the administration doing now? Because, how's this going to affect our clients now? And what do we advise our clients? Because we're still kind of trying to get a pulse and figure out what's the new direction, because we had 4 years of the Biden administration and we knew kind of where it was going. Now we're like, well, maybe things are getting repealed. We don't know. Maybe they're going to do away with some of the environmental regulations. We don't know. And it's been interesting this past 6 months.
Right. Well, and that's unfair. It's unfair to every community, because when we learned about PFAS in our tap water, and we joined the National PFAS Contamination Coalition, because we found that there were other communities just like ours all over the country dealing with very similar problems, whether it be DOD, shoe manufacturer, the customer that purchases from DuPont and Chemours, all of these communities were finding excessive levels of PFAS in their tap water because of the UCMR3 or UCMR4. I can't remember which one it was. And I think what's important to remember is the first Trump administration oversaw that. And we worked through the first Trump administration, and there was forward movement. There was, let's address this. Then the Biden administration came and they picked it up and said, let's further that. Let's go farther. So the trajectory was always forward. Now, under the second Trump administration, it is very baffling, because the trajectory is not forward. It's, whoa, let's go backwards. And again, that is a disservice to communities, because this has been a bipartisan topic in almost every community that I talk to. People universally recognize they just don't want these exposures.
No.
The only people that are struggling with this are the ones that are trying to make money off of it. Well, and then, the misaligned interests, the municipalities that have a choice today. They have, the municipalities that have a choice to make, which is, do we address this hard topic, or do we pretend it doesn't exist and continue with inaction? Inaction has a cost, and that cost will still burden your community, or it'll burden your neighboring communities, but it is still a cost, and it is still a burden.
Oh yeah, 100% it is. And what are you hearing from some of the legal groups that you've been kind of supporting, and or working side by side with? Have you heard anything from that group who are challenging some of these rules?
Yeah, well, we are interveners. We partnered with Earth Justice, and we intervened when the chemical industry and the utility association started suing the EPA over the new drinking water standards last year. We filed to intervene, and we got approved to become participants in that lawsuit. So we're following that right now, and nothing has been decided. So we're still kind of in conversation. Interestingly enough, I mentioned earlier that our own community has been dealing with a very long lawsuit to try and get the polluter directly to cover its fair share of treatment upgrades and costs. And we had a very interesting development happen earlier this year, where Chemours filed a motion to seal. They did not want Wilmington's water district to have their briefings and all the supporting documents available for public view. And this is just classic industry playbook, which is hide the data, hide the toxicity, hide the data, hide the wrongdoing, hide it all. And that's really unfortunate. And so we worked and we got 1,500 signatures within our community to push back and beg the judge to dismiss that.
And were you successful?
Well, we're waiting. So that, this is
Oh,
ongoing litigation. The same
okay. Okay.
it's ongoing litigation. So there's really not a lot we can say. There's not a lot of
Right.
people are saying with ongoing litigation.
Right. Well, interesting. If we change gears a bit here, I know that there's been some good stuff. I saw you on, was it ABC Nightly News or something like that? Tell me a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, CBS Evening News Live, I think, was covering when the EPA made the announcement that they were going to rescind the PFAS drinking water standards, and so that was just a super quick segment. It went so fast, but it was nice to have that platform and that elevation, because this is clearly a topic that impacts millions of Americans. I think the EPA had estimated 150 million Americans have PFAS in their tap water. And so these drinking water standards are incredibly important. Another thing that's important for us to remember that kind of gets lost in the nuance and details of it is that, the EPA kind of was thinking ahead last year when they created these drinking water standards. There's the co-benefit of, if we set these really health protective standards for PFOA and PFOS, which is supported by science. The best available science did say that these were the levels at which we should treat that there'd be a co-benefit of other unregulated contaminants, that those would also get filtered out and cleaned out. So we were just improving the quality of American drinking water. I mean, who doesn't want that? Again, let's make it affordable. Like, we 100% agree. Communities should have access to the money. Where is that conversation happening in Congress right now? Does the big beautiful bill have any funding for communities to upgrade their drinking water?
That's a good question, and I have not, heard that. Haven't spoken to any congressmen or congresswomen about that, but that would be interesting to know. And you do bring up an interesting point about, the co-benefit of treating PFOS and PFOA, that you're going to also kind of catch all these other chemicals. Do you think that is one of the reasons why EPA is wanting to pull this back a bit, because they already kind of feel like it's going to get baked into treating those chemicals that they're not regulating, if they're going to keep the two that they have?
Well, I don't think you can treat for PFOA and PFOS only. I think we've always advocated that you need to treat PFAS as a class. There are 14,000 different PFAS known. There's
Mm-hmm.
hundreds of them that are in commercial use. We're not even
Mm-hmm.
talking about the ultra short chains PFAS. And
Mm-hmm.
so, we partnered with the NRDC a couple of years ago, and we did a tap water study when the EPA issued their UCMR5, which had like 29 something sort of PFAS
Mm-hmm.
that utilities were all supposed to test for. And we showed that, we used Eurofin's 70 method to just try and see how many unmonitored PFAS were showing up in tap water. And we were so shocked that the majority of the samples came back with this compound called PFPRA, and it's an ultra short chain PFAS. And then there's TFA, which is another ultra short chain PFAS that we're starting to see in extreme levels showing up in tap water. And I think German environmental regulators actually just issued toxicity profile on TFA, linking it to reproductive issues. Again, so here's, while we're talking about PFOA, PFOS, which was kind of grandma's PFAS, and then the EPA is looking at the PFAS that we're currently making, some that we're currently making, some that we're not. We still aren't talking about the ultra short chain PFAS. And the one thing that we did learn through our whole journey is that you can't just treat for PFOA and PFOS, because if you only look at PFOA and PFOS, you're going to miss a community like ours. Our issue was not PFOA and PFOS. Our issue was an unmonitored and unregulated Gen X and hundreds of other PFAS that we did not have test standards for, that utilities did not know to look for. It took academic researchers to do some forensic analysis and try and understand, like reverse ninja science, to try and figure out what is in this water.
So, it seems like we're still on the forefront of still educating the the population and at large. I don't know how many people I talk to. I go, "Hey, have you seen that movie Dark Waters?" And they're like, "Huh? What are you talking about?" And I talk to people that are in the environmental industry, and I'm like, "Shame on you guys! How could you not know about this movie? This is what we do in the environmental industry, and this is totally related." Like I said, "Well, have you seen Aaron Brockovich?" And a lot of them go, "Oh yeah, 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 I've seen that one, but that's been out a while, right?" But unfortunately, a lot of people still haven't seen Dark Waters, and I promote it constantly. We have Robert coming to be our keynote speaker at the EHS Hazmat Summit in September. We're so excited to have him be our keynote speaker. And I know that now this new this new rule that's being repealed is going to be, front and center as part of this conversation that he will be talking about in his keynote speech. And we were able to get him. We're so excited to have him, and he's a big draw for us. And so we're so thankful. But I still feel like it's the outreach, it's still the education that we're still really way behind on. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and I think there's a couple of things that played out. We had Mark come and be a guest speaker when we did 2 screenings of Dark Water. So it premiered at the end of 2019, and yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and so we had Mark come at the beginning of 2020. It was like one of the last events we did before the COVID shutdown. So I think
Yeah.
we have to remember that there was a massive global disruption that happened,
Right.
that I think really impacted the momentum that Dark Waters was building. Then we also have to remember that we are definitely in a different news environment. Where you used to just have a couple of different methods to get the same message out. Now it's exponential. There's a bazillion different methods to get information out, and everybody's siloed into their favorite social media channel. And there's only so much time you have in the day to absorb news. And I think this is what society is struggling with, and we see the symptoms of this struggle, this chronic um, you know, fractured news cycle happening. And some people appreciate that. Some people feel like, I didn't just want one size fits all news. I want to be able to pick and choose my news. And I understand that and I respect that.
Yeah.
But we definitely are missing Fairness in Reporting Act. That expired. So the ability to require journalists to report both sides in the same news story. I mean, that's expired, and Congress decided to never pick it back up. We went into 24-hour cable news in the 90s, and now we've got this accelerated social media, where social media is the news now.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and people are digesting their information in 1 minute clips or 2 minute clips, and that's it. They watch shorts and that's it. And they're scrolling and going down the rabbit hole on Instagram, or TikTok, and that's how they're getting their news.
They are. And you know what? Honestly, that's the direction we're headed in. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with it, but I would say is that it's really important that everybody start paying attention to that. And instead of fighting it, learn how to embrace it, because those that are embracing it early and quickly, you're seeing are reaping the benefits and the rewards from it, whether that's right or wrong. I think another thing that we also need to remember too is information is spreading faster. That is one of the benefits. And so we actually, if we want to take a step back and go, how is awareness? Yeah, we 100% need to keep raising awareness. But I think it's pretty darn impressive that when we woke up 8 years ago and learned about Gen X, no one knew what Gen X was. And
Mm-hmm.
everybody was just talking about PFOA and PFOS. In the span of a few short years, we had people talking about the class of chemistry, PFAS, PFAS. We had them talking about that. We shifted that narrative. And then in a few short years after that, we had the EPA issuing first ever drinking water standards for 6 PFAS, including Gen X. And this is an EPA that works within a broken system that hadn't in decades issued a drinking water standard without an act of Congress. And
Right.
so, I mean, I think this is pretty impressive, pretty powerful, and it's a big testament to the level of community support, bipartisan support, and the National PFAS Contamination Coalition's work to try and make this happen and partnering with allies, and the dedication of professional advocates like EWG and NRDC and Earth Justice and Center for Environmental Health, all the big ones, Mind the Store, Toxic Free Future, these
Yeah. Michael
green
Shedd, mind the
policies,
store.
all of these organizations coming together and rallying around this immediate, important threat of PFAS exposures.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
a huge, it really is our lifetime's number one environmental problem. Aside from, you've got, not to disrespect climate change and microplastics, but we're dealing with a level of chemistry that's not going away, that it's been so unmanaged and so much inaction has occurred with it that we now have scientists say that PFAS has reached the planetary boundary, which means when it rains, it's likely raining PFAS. And it will be for some time because, again, these don't naturally degrade.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so the fight goes on. The education goes on. We all need to kind of stay on top of this. And I know here on the show with this platform, we're going to continue to educate the listeners and the ET Nation about what the impacts are of PFAS and the regulatory changes and the affected communities like Cape Fear, Clean Cape Fear, and I just feel like we've got a great opportunity to continue being one piece of that media, segment. If you're following us on YouTube, obviously, even on our podcast channels as well, but YouTube, our shorts are getting lots of, watches now. We decided we'd start hitting a lot of shorts instead of just posting the entire episode, figuring that if we did that, it would drive people to watch the entire episode, which we're seeing numbers in go up in there too, but our shorts are just going off the charts right now. It's amazing. And so that's exciting because now it's like we're having more constant exposure in impressions and having a greater impact than just someone listening for a half hour or an hour to a full episode. They're getting that daily dose, right? And so we're doing everything we can to on the show, and it's people like you, Emily, that come onto the show that remind us why this is such an important issue. And I really thank you for being willing to come back on the show. You're such an amazing person. And talk a little bit about that little I don't know what you call it, a promo story or about educating the kids at about PFAS that was with Mark Ruffalo that put out a while back. And I think you had him on your show, or she was on you or on their show, or I don't know. I saw some
Yeah.
clip. Tell me, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Oh, that was that. This is, getting back to the idea of awareness and how do we keep building awareness. And so the National PFAS Contamination Coalition partnered with Keen Footwear, and Keen Footwear is pretty special. So we're looking for market drivers. We know that communities don't want PFAS in their product, but we're also learning that consumer brands don't necessarily want it either. And Keen was one of the first consumer brands to voluntarily remove PFAS from their products, intentionally added PFAS from their products. So we partnered with them. They have kind of a film effects side of their brand where they make awareness videos to just kind of explain the footprint that they're leaving on the world. And so Max Rami is this filmmaker, but he's also just a really amazing watercolor artist. And he did the cutest little movie. It's about 10 minutes. And he's talking to his 2-year-old son, and he's explaining what the term forever means. And then as he explains it, he just kind of goes through and they talk about PFAS, forever chemicals. And we helped. It was a really cool experience because the National PFAS Contamination Coalition helped connect Keen to Mark Ruffalo. And so, we were able to kind of watch this and guide this film through the whole process. And so I just had an amazing ride, was able to be there for the premiere of the film in Denver at Outside Fest. So I participated in that. And then Mark and Max and I did an Instagram live last week where we just sat and kind of talked about the project. It's called a Little Story About Forever. You can find it on Keen's YouTube channel.
Yeah.
You can find it on its social media.
I've shared it with the ET Nation on our channel too, and we'll share it again. But it was well done. I liked it.
Absolutely amazing. And the
Yeah.
little army of goodness, we was a sweet nod to the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. We are the little army of goodness, and so is everybody else in this fight. So if you're trying to stop PFAS exposures, know your health risks, and make the polluter pay, you are a part of this. You are the little army of goodness.
Well, ET Nation, you're part of the little army of goodness too. There you go. That's great. This has been so good. I mean, yeah, we're super excited to see Mr. Balatz in September and I get to meet him in person because I didn't meet him in person before, and now I get to meet him in person. I'm pretty excited about it, and I get to introduce him as our keynote speaker at the conference. So I'm super stoked about it.
He's amazing. Like there's people that have courage. We talk about having courage a lot in this fight and being as persistent as PFAS. And boy, is like he leads by example. We wouldn't be here today, honestly, if it wasn't for his courage and hearing a farmer's concern and working to do what was right instead of what was easy. And that's where we're at today. We look at this drinking water fight. We're doing what's right. We are, and I encourage every utility out there, don't do what's easy. Do what's right, because that's what your community desperately wants, whether they know it or not.
Yeah, no, that's a great thought there, and a great parting shot, Emily. I mean, again, 3-time guest, you got the record. So thank you for showing up and doing your part and helping the podcast grow. We've been doing this now. It's hard to believe, Emily, over 5 years. We've been doing this for over 5 years now. And, it's just been a labor of love in a lot of ways. And what I get out of it is the just such great connections with people like you and it just gets me jazzed up to go do these podcasts because I meet so many amazing people. And it's just a blast. And so we get to educate and put shine a light on people doing great things in our country and around the world. So thank you again for joining. We will put all your contact information on the website, on the post. I've got all your details. So we'll get this out probably next week, and we'll promote this. And is there anything you can say at the last minute here that if someone wants to reach out and support anything you're doing, how can they do that?
Yeah, follow us on social media. We're at Clean Cape Fear. Visit our website, cleancapefear.com, and subscribe to our newsletter where we send out regular action alerts when something's pressing. Follow the National PFAS Contamination Coalition. You can find them at pfasproject.net. And you can follow them on social media at PFAS Coalition.
All right, Emily, thank you so much. And we'll be looking forward to seeing you down the road and continue our dialogue as we, something else interesting pops up.
Awesome. I appreciate it. This is always fun. Thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching the show. If you enjoyed the show, then please share it with your friends and coworkers on social media and tell somebody in person. Thanks for being with us, ET Nation.